Hey, welcome back to Make More Music, the podcast that connects people to music and one another. My name's Chris, and I'm a board-certified music therapist. Today, I was able to sit down with my mentor, friend, and fellow podcaster, Blake Wyland of the Tone Mob podcast. If you don't know anything about the Tone Mob, it is a guitar gear-centric podcast that talks to builders, boutique company owners, and artists in a variety of genres. But Blake is doing a lot more than that. He talks about partnering with a lot of different companies. He talks about social media strategy, and honestly, how he went from his previous manual labor field job and worked up his passion project of a podcast and turned it into what he said is the job of his dreams now. So we'll hear a little bit about what it's like to work in that side of the media music industry and all the awesome things that he's working on right now as well. So without further ado, here is Blake Wyland. Well, cool deal. Well, I'm just super pumped, Blake, that you've wanted to come on. You are, now that I'm getting into the mix of all of this podcasting stuff, I would call you like my podcasting Obi-Wan. It was just kind of funny. Coming on your podcast was the first time I really thought, I've had that idea for a while. I've been putting it off, and it just kind of spurred things and got me into motion for things. So I'm just glad to hear your story today. And I know you've just got back from a crazy NAMM, so I won't push your voice too hard, but let's flip the mic around a little bit, because you are normally doing all the interviews. So let's hear a little bit about you and what you do. So let's start with your life and go way back to the beginning. What are some of your earliest musical memories?
Ooh, okay. This is interesting. Like, music was always a big part of my life. My parents always had music playing, and my dad played guitar, and we would watch bands and stuff. It was always a thing, and a lot of my dad's friends played music, and so it was always a really big part of my life. And so just kind of going back to, my dad sitting in the chair like playing guitar, and I remember just as a little kid being like, well, I want to do that. And I would like go up to try to play the guitar, but I was like 4, and he's like, no, this is not for you to touch. Like, like, and so it was always something I just was really curious about. And then getting a little bit older and seeing some of my friends actually start playing in bands and start creating music together. And I was like, well, maybe I can do that. It's always, even now to me, it's always with this weirdly unattainable thing to like actually be in the music industry, even though that's what I'm doing now. It was like back then it was just like, that's never going to happen. And so I just would watch these people create things, and it was like, oh, maybe this is actually something that I can do. And I started on piano because that's where I was suggested to start. And I think that is a good starting place, but it didn't really click with me in the same way. It clicked with me a lot more in recent years than it did when I was a kid. I just kept trying to bring these guitar-based rock songs to my piano teacher, and she's like, well, what do you want to learn? What do you listen to? And I'm like, well, I listen to Nirvana. Like,
what do you mean Smells Like Teen Spirit doesn't sound good on this upright piano?
Right, exactly. And so, which if you arranged it right, I guess anything's possible. But she was just like, I don't know. I don't know if she literally was like, maybe you need to go play guitar, which
That is hilarious.
I think that was, it's kind of it's not like she was just rolling in cash, so it was kind of an interesting thing for a teacher to be like, I really don't think that this is your instrument. Like, not that I couldn't do it, or like didn't have the ability to play it. She was just, she could tell that I didn't have the interest, I think. And practice was always a drag. And so I picked up guitar. I didn't really have lessons though. It started with Smells Like Teen Spirit for me. I picked up an acoustic that was in the family that was kind of on loan to me, and that's the first song I taught myself. And so it was like, wow, this is cool. Like, all right, I can play cool songs, like that songs that I like, songs that I'm interested in. And then some of my friends started getting more and more into punk, and therefore so did I. And that led me down a whole different road. That opened up a whole weird world to me that was so foreign, because all of the music I heard growing up was like primarily country songs, and
Mm.
I am a huge fan of that genre still. But I was like, what are all these crazy people doing, running around, running into each other, and moshing, and like screaming and yelling? I was like, it just really resonated with me for some reason. Uh,
Mm.
I wasn't really like one of those angry kids or anything like that. I mean, occasionally, I guess, as teens do, but
Yeah. Hormones and everything. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But like not a habitually like troublemaking kid. At least I didn't get caught that often. Um, and so it was kind of an eye opening experience. And so I started going to a lot of these shows, uh, listening to a lot of these metalcore bands, and that's very of the time that I came up in too. The mid to early 2000s.
Hmm.
And so growing up with the Warp Tour and going to that and seeing all those bands, it was had a huge impact on me. And
Mm.
a lot of those bands are still some of my favorites. And yeah, it kind of naturally progressed into wanting to write and record my own versions of that. Excuse me, most of which were pretty poor. And and then yeah, it just was my circle of friends were all very interested in writing and recording music, and that led into the gear world. And I was just like, oh, what are all, like, I very much remember plugging in the first time I plugged in a tube amp and knew what it
Mm.
was. Maybe I had plugged into something before and didn't really realize what I was doing, but I plugged into an orange Tiny Terror actually,
Oh,
and
wow.
was just like, whoa, this is different than my crate. Like,
That's
this
awesome.
is
Yeah, yeah.
this is something else.
Oh,
And
great.
then,
What a perfect, like, 2000s metalcore.
oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I still have it too, and I actually really like it for that stuff. It's actually a really good amplifier. The Crate XT120R. You can pick them up for a song and a dance, and they're pretty versatile. I just didn't really know what I was doing with it at the time.
We thought it was so cool. One of our friends had the Spider, the Line 6 Spider with
Oh
and
yeah,
the insane mode and all. Oh man,
you
it
gotta have it.
seemed so cool in like 2004.
Oh yeah, you only play it on insane mode. That's the only thing you did, right?
Even though it's like intolerable for your ears, it was still so cool because the light went red and it was just drenched in distortion.
Yeah, and I don't know what else. I feel like there's other things going on. I have one here too that's been in my circle of friends that belong to my friend Leon from Pelican Noiseworks, and he can't seem to give it away. So I just said, "Oh, it can live over here. It's funny to look at."
It's like a rescue amp. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's actually, I mean, really, we like to make fun of them because we're such gear snobs, but it's actually not bad. There's actually some pretty good sounds in it. It's just we all just remember the Insane channel. That's all we used.
I feel like pretty much everything I had was usable. Everything me or my friends had, it got us by.
Yeah,
Uh, you were just talking to somebody on your show about the B52 half stack, and I was like, oh man, that's the first big one I bought because it was a half stack and it was $400.
right,
So
exactly.
yeah, that's awesome. So before we kind of hop into your getting into the gear journey, one of the things I want to hear about, because I feel like you've probably got some great band names. How many bands were you a part of at that time? And throw me out some of the awesome band names you had or went through.
Well, it's funny because my circles of friends has largely remained the same, at least as far as music stuff goes.
Hmm.
And so it's always been like just different iterations of the same band for the
Hmm.
the most part, with different like directions, I guess. So sometimes we would, back when we were doing like lots of punk and lots of hardcore and stuff, and just like everything in that genre, and it was mostly covers. We wrote a couple things. We played the high school talent show. We were called the Left Coast Avengers,
There it
and
is.
I don't know why we came up with that. Probably because we're comic book nerds and live on the West Coast is the best I can think of. It was our bassist idea, and we were just driving and trying to figure out band names one day, and he threw that out there, and it worked. Um,
Yep.
a little bit of personnel changes later. Not much. We just our friend that always just hung out with us and was a big music nerd replaced the drummer. That guy that was playing drums, he's still a great friend. He just stopped playing drums. And so one day we said, "Hey Joshua, you're pretty good at dashboard drumming. Why don't you hop on that kit?" And it turns out he was a pretty good real drummer too, just kind of naturally without really any practice, which is kind of annoying.
Yeah, that is annoying.
And so he became our drummer, and that was largely us doing covers and things too. And at that point, we were called Gravy Train because we seen a bag of dog food that said
I was
Gravy
about to
Train on
say
it.
my dog in high school used to eat Gravy Train. That's hilarious.
And that was
stuff
actually
is gross.
oh,
by the way,
it's so disgusting
you
looking.
mix the hot water with it, and it gets like nasty.
Yeah, it looks foul, but hey, the pooches seem to love it for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's
So
hilarious.
so yeah, we did that, and then it was the same band, and we were like, we want to make an actual album, and this is about 2015, I think 2014, maybe somewhere in there. I think it was like between 2014 and I think we recorded in 2015, and we like wrote all throughout the late 2013 2014 era, I think, which it's weird to think it was that long ago. It feels like yesterday. But we then we were serious about that record. Everything else was pretty jokey and like just cover band just for fun, with a few originals thrown in there. But this album we were actually like really putting some effort and some thought into, from like a serious perspective. Like kind of everything we had ever done before had a hint of just joking around. And even some of the songs, it's pretty obvious that it was just humor based. And this was a pretty serious record. We had gone through a pretty difficult time with one of our friends, getting into some stuff that he shouldn't have, and he's no longer with us, unfortunately. And so that was a really difficult time for all of us. And we kind of the record's not entirely based around that, but there's definitely a lot of elements of that influence in it.
Yeah.
And so we were like, we can't be Gravy Train.
We can't be named after this filthy dog food.
Yeah, we can't do that. And so we kind of agonized over it for a long time. And we settled on Anchor Ashore, which is, of course, because it's came from me. It's a Thrice reference. They have a song that they say, "How can I leave when my anchor's ashore?" And we're like, man, that's such a good line. And so we use that, and despite like we were like trying not to be so derivative, but I'm like, Dustin's lyrics are so good. Like, how can we not take some inspiration from that? But so that is the current band's name. Although we haven't done anything really since the recording, unfortunately. Like that was right about the time that everybody started having kids or more kids, or whatever. Yeah. And so it's kind of been put on the back burner, although that's not really intentional. It just has been. And of course, the three guitarists in the band are massive gear nerds. And so we've just continued to acquire. We thought we had a lot of gear at the time. We even took some pictures of it, and I've posted it on social, a few years ago. But now we're like, oh boy, we're not even going to be able to bring all of our stuff to the next recording session. So we're going to have to record close in case we need to go run back and get anything. But it's we've just continued the gear journey, and Leon's in that band. He started Pelican Noiseworks after we made that record. And
awesome.
So yeah, that's kind of where the gear journey really started, was right after that record, really.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I think it's also pretty interesting that you all like dug into this processing of grief, made this album, and it's kind of been its thing for now. And I think that's actually pretty cool that you all just kind of like, there is that. We're going to continue. When we feel like we need to come back together, we'll come back together. And you all, I would assume, are all kind of at that same, young adult life now where you're like, there's so much going on. But to transition back into the gear part, so you're starting to dig into all of this gear stuff. What are some things that kind of spark you off into, like you said, the tube amp? Do you remember what amp that was?
That was an Orange Tiny Terror, and then
you said that, yeah.
And then but right immediately afterwards, there was I can't remember the model number. There was a Gibson amp that they made. It was
Mm.
like a reissue, and it was, I think, the GA40. I can't remember exactly. I'm
Is
not
that
real.
the country western one?
It was the one with like the gold covers on it.
Mm.
And I think I have like very weird memories of that time because I can't remember exactly what it is. I just know that it was like at the time the most beautiful clean tone I'd ever heard, and it was also a
Wow.
tube amp. And it was like, whoa, what are we doing? We're doing it wrong. Like
Yeah.
we've been doing it all wrong. And so yeah, that right around, and then immediately I was like, well, I got to get a tube amp, and so I furiously searched Craigslist and ended up with a pretty good deal on an amp that I still have and really like on a Fender 75 head,
Awesome.
which is has been modded by Chris Benson, as half of my amps have, and it sounds great. But yeah, that was the really the start. It actually started with the amps, and then I got into the pedals. I think that's
Mm.
because I finally had a good platform. That Fender's very clean and very loud, lots of headroom. And so I finally had a good platform to work off of, and it was kind of right during like the the boutique pedal like explosion. I feel like it really came. It started like way back in the day, obviously, there,
Mm-hmm.
but and then the early 2000s there was Keeley and Analog Man, Mike Fuller, and all those guys kind of doing it, and it was starting to become a thing. And then in the mid 2000s and late 2000s is when it really just like boom.
Yeah.
Andy started making videos. That demos became a thing. The whole scene completely changed.
Yeah. It went away from professionals only using that kind of boutique stuff to the internet showing what people were doing and more than just a message board. And I'm sure you were on the old Ultimate Guitar forums and stuff like that back in the day too. So you're digging into all this stuff, and then I think people will be super interested to hear your journey and how you went through being a guy with a job, with a full time career, and then how you made this transition into the music industry and what you do now. So you're in the meantime, you've got all this nerding out on the gear. You're playing with your dudes, and then what's that process for you? What's that journey of going into where you are now?
It was really weird. It was very strange. It was really an experiment. I knew that I really wasn't happy at my job. It was a good job. I'm not complaining about it. It was a very excellent job, but it also required me to be gone all the time. And I didn't really like that. I knew I wanted to start a family and all that stuff. It was just a very difficult schedule for me. Some people
Mm-hmm.
can do that stuff a lot better, but for me it was really tough. And I thought, maybe there's a way I can get into this industry. And at the time I was listening to a lot of podcasts. Well, I still am. I've never stopped listening to podcasts. But I was listening to a lot of podcasts, listening to some businessy type ones, and I started listening to music ones, and I realized that there weren't that many guitar ones at all. There were a handful. I found like Six String Bliss, um, and a few others. Chasing Tone was the one that really kicked it off for me, with the original iteration of that, which
Mm-hmm.
will be funny to get into later for your listeners. But
Yeah, yeah.
so that was the one that really kicked it off, and then I found 60 Cycle Hum and GAK. I didn't find the Guitar Nerds when they were GAK. I found them later, but those guys all started before me. But that was really it at the time. There wasn't anything like it is now, and there definitely was not any interview based ones, at least not ones that I could find. And I just kind of thought, well, I mean, I can try this. Like, I like to talk to people. I would love to talk to some of these builders and all that. And so I started on Instagram because it I actually had no social media at all at the time. I didn't have a Facebook. I didn't have Twitter. I didn't have anything. I didn't see a need for it for me. Most of my
Mm-hmm.
friends and family were all pretty close to me geographically, and I had their phone numbers if I needed to get something from them or talk to them. And I just didn't see a big need for the Facebook stuff. And
Mhm.
but Instagram, I went to it, after it had been around for a few years, and I was like, well, this is kind of cool. Like, you can make your feed into whatever you want it to be, by following these certain accounts.
Mhm.
And I was
A
like,
little bit more curated, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it was, yeah, just to me,
A
it's more,
little less political post.
yeah, it's a little more Instagram. And I think this is still true. To me, it was like, oh, this is more like, can be exactly what you want it to be. And if there's something you don't like, I don't know. It's always just been my favorite social platform. And so I was like, well, let's see, I should start, let's start here and see what happens. And I started posting gear stuff, some of my own stuff. The first thing I posted was my 1965 Ampeg J12, which was a recent
Mm.
purchase at the time. I just took a picture of it. I remember the date really well just because it was like the day that Blake got on social, which was weird, So like,
Yeah.
it was March 19th, and I posted it, and all of a sudden, this is what made me realize that there was potential in it. Is like, I had random people that I didn't know liking and commenting on it, and I was like, "Whoa, who are these? Who are these people?" And I would like DM them and be like, dude, thanks for liking this or whatever. And some of them would respond, some of them wouldn't. I was just kind of getting a feel for how it all worked. And at that time,
Mhm.
there was a bunch of pages already going gear wise. Like, Gear Talk had already started, and there was several others. So I just thought, well, I can do that. This seems pretty easy. And for me, it was. I just would keep a regular schedule of posts, a lot of reposts in the beginning, um, just because I was at work and I didn't have access to my own gear at the time. So,
Mhm.
but I knew I needed to keep the content flowing. And so I just kind of built this gear account, is what it was at first, and started doing some giveaways and just trying to build a base. And then I was like, okay, now I can launch the podcast. So, it had a decent following when I launched the podcast. So we had downloads on day one, which was really
Cool.
handy. Because it's if I hadn't, it can be a little bit discouraging. It's like, ah, man, I put it out there and there's nobody listening. Kind of like my YouTube channel. But it was just one of those things that I kind of knew I had to start from somewhere, and so that's where it started for me. I launched the episode with Ryan McCaffrey from McCaffrey Audio that I recorded. It was really like I should backpedal a little bit. It was really a funny series of events because um I had just found this app called Ringer, as I knew, like I said, I
Mm.
was at work all the time. So scheduling it was very difficult, but this app Ringer changed the game because it let me record from my phone and let the guests record from their phone. And the audio quality, while it's not as good as what is available now, it was way better than anything else that was available at the time, especially for the tools we were working with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I recorded the first episode up in Forest Park in Portland, which is this massive park that kind of overlooks the city. It's literally on the side of a big hill. So I was just up in the trees with my headphones recording with Ryan, and we just had a great time. And I, edited it, published it, and yeah, had downloads on day one. I was like, "Oh, this is great." And the feedback was really good, and it kind of just kept going from there. Uh, kept kept interviewing, kept doing the thing, and through that, the podcasting's weird. A lot of people view podcasts as this great way to like make money, and that's like saying like you're gonna make great money as a musician. It's like, yes, the top 1% make great money, but everyone else kind of is left to pick up the scraps, and that's very
Mhm.
much the same way in most creative endeavors. Um, so the podcast, was just like kind of like the thing I became known for in the industry. Kind of like Andy was known for doing demos, I became known for doing interviews. Not that
Mhm.
I'm like at that level at all, but like that was just where people knew me from.
Your little slice of notoriety. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it kind of got to a point though where I started talking with brands and started talking because that's who I was associating with. And they were trying to figure out how to grow their followings. They were trying to figure out how to improve their business practices and all that stuff. And I just seemed to have a weird knack for that stuff. It's not something
Hmm.
I went to school for or had any formal training on, but it was like I just researched enough of that trying to grow my own thing that I kind of became a consultant for a lot of these smaller companies to try to help them. And so that's eventually what allowed me to be able to transition out of my day job and put even more time into the podcast and get it, and to get it to where it is now, making a little bit of money. At least it's not costing me money anymore. Um, and and yeah, and I get to work in and around my favorite stuff and help these other companies and these other builders try to do better on their end too. And it's really been a great experience. I've never enjoyed my work more than I do now. So it's really, really, really awesome.
Yeah, all kinds of awesome things to dig in kind of from that point. So, talk me through a little bit that jump of going from, oh man, I'm really doing this now. I'm really all in on the podcast and the brand and the consulting. Were you already pretty confident at that point, or what were some of the emotions and stuff leading up to that jump?
Well, this is actually something that I get a lot of questions about, and I feel like I came at it from a little bit of a unique perspective, I guess. What I did was I got it. I did that for a few years. I basically worked two jobs, and instead of like spending all that money that that was additional income, I tried to save as much as I could, and so I would save that, stick it to the side, and then once I had enough runway, and it also had been like proven for a couple years that this was going to be a consistent thing, then I made the jump. And it made it substantially less scary than it was for a lot of people who just are like, "Well, this is my thing now. See you later." And so
Mm,
it's not as it's not as glamorous, I guess, and some people need both feet held to the fire in order to really push themselves. But for me, like, stability was really important. So I needed to be like, okay, I've got a few months of cushion if everything just dries up all of a sudden and I got to go get another job. Which, by the way, I'm fully open to the possibility that I may have to go get another job at some point. I feel extremely fortunate to be able to do what I'm doing right now,
yeah.
and I'm not against it. I've done all kinds of ridiculous manual labor jobs, and I'll do it again if I have to pay the bills. It's just how it works. But yeah, I always recommend to people, like, try to give yourself some runway, and then also, like, you know, build it on the side. There's nothing wrong with building it on the side. Some people want to say like you're not a real entrepreneur, you're not really doing it if you're doing it on the side, and I think that's nonsense. Like, you do it on the
Mm,
side until you've proven to yourself that it's a viable thing, and maybe you have a little cushion to fall back on, and it just makes it so much less stressful to make that jump. Like,
yeah,
I didn't
it's just
have that.
responsible. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have that anxiety that a lot of people talk about. I didn't have that at all, because it was like that I'll be fine for a little while, type of thing. So that's how it went for me.
That's exciting. Well, tell me then, because you mentioned, and kind of maybe the first place that I heard you, I can't remember if I heard Tone Mob first and then Chasing Tone or vice versa, but it was around the same time that I got tired of my current podcast and searched guitar and found you all. So, how did you get connected with Brian and the role that you're almost weekly on Chasing Tone now as well?
Yeah, that was crazy. Basically, I asked him to come on my show, and he said yes, and then we got along really well. That's really all there was to it. Like, we got along really well when we recorded the podcast. We found ourselves talking, like, basically weekly on the phone for about the same amount of time we do the Chasing Tone podcast,
Mm,
and we just it was just a really good fit, and that was never intentional. I didn't intend to slide into that show or anything, but his employees that were working for him, that were producing that show, or recording that show rather, ended up getting different jobs. And so that was right around episode 100 of Chasing Tone, so it was already a very well established thing that they
hmm.
did. But they moved on to better careers, and Brian wasn't mad at him or anything. He encouraged it, but he was also like, "Man, this is kind of a thing. Do I just put a bow on it and call it done?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right. Didn't really feel right to him to do that." but he also didn't know what to do. And I was like, well, maybe I'll just come on and co-host an episode, and then maybe you can like find different people to kind of co-host it with you, like your friends. And it just became such a thing that like we just had really good chemistry, and so I just yeah, like you said, pretty much weekly. There's probably maybe 20 episodes in the last few years that I haven't done, but it's usually me and Brian being dorks. That's generally
Yeah,
what it is. So
it's great. You all bantering, and I'm just generally not usually a big fan of the banter style podcast, but it's literally like I listen to two people that I know their corny jokes and I know their dad jokes, and occasionally they talk about other things that I'm interested in, like guitar as well. And I just think it's a it's another great show, and it's really the only time I check in to hear any kind of banter based show at all. So
well, I'm glad you enjoy it. There's definitely people who like they're like bring back the originals, and I'm like, I kind of agree with them because I like it better too with the originals, but I don't really like listening to myself, which is a thing I thought I would get over at some point, but it's better, but I'm still not entirely over that yet. But it's I don't know. I think it's just a different show now. It's evolved. It was always banter based, but it's Max and Travis had different experiences than Brian and I. And Brian
mhm,
and I now have a lot more similar experiences than we do different ones. He obviously goes more into the tech side, and I'm diving more into like the social side. But
mhm.
like it's we work in the same business, kind of thinking about the same thing. So it just has morphed into something else that fits our personalities, and we really enjoy doing it. Brian doesn't tend to do anything if he's not super into it. So yeah, it's real. Like it's a real thing that I'm glad that people tune into that one. It's a really cool show, and I know that it sounds silly, but it's helped some people somehow. We've got the messages that they're like keep going. So we as long as we keep getting that, we're gonna keep doing it.
That's pretty awesome, man. So now that your life has transitioned to what it is now, what does a week look like? I know it's probably very flexible, but generally, what are the kind of things you're doing, week in to week out, or, maybe even this season to the next season, uh, projects wise and things like that? What does it look like for you?
It looks a lot like what we're doing right now. I spend a lot of time recording the podcast, obviously. Scheduling for that is always fun, as you're probably starting to figure out. It gets
Yeah.
a little bit weird, but it's that is actually way more work than I. That's one thing I will say to any aspiring podcasters out there. The recording is one thing. There's a whole bunch that goes on afterwards and before that people don't see, and they never will see, because unless it's a podcast about podcasting, I guess. But
Yeah.
it's like there's a whole different level of things, and you have to figure out, oh, do all the podcatchers have my RSS feed? Do am I distributed on it everywhere I need to be? Because there's certain people that only use certain platforms, and it's and when you're a podcaster, every download counts. So even if you got one person listening on one platform, it's worth it to be there if it doesn't cost you money. And
Hmm.
so it's a lot of like trying to I learned a lot about that in the last year. Like, oh man, I wasn't on some big platforms, and trying to get on those, and it's been really helpful to be on them. So it's a lot of that. And then for like my clients and stuff, it ends up being a lot of phone calls. So I'm on the
Hmm.
phone a lot. In the nice weather, I'm like always on the phone walking around my neighborhood for like
Oh, that's
hours.
nice.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
like hours and hours, which I enjoy. That's one of my favorite parts about it. And those are generally like strategy calls, or maybe we have a specific issue that we're trying to work on, or maybe it's a new person who's I've never talked to before, and they want to know if I can help them. That
Mm.
that can be any kind. Those phone calls can be of a wide range of topics. Who knows? Like,
Yeah.
so they tend to go for a long time once we get into the nitty gritty details of strategy things and things of that nature. And it's not always guitar stuff. It's not always guitar clients. It's I got clients from outside of the industry as well, and so these things apply to just about any consumer good that is sold on the internet. So it could the
Yeah, that's
topics.
pretty exciting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that. I've been trying to do more video content, both for YouTube and for Instagram. So I'm doing more pedal demos these days, which I'm really enjoying. I didn't get real comfortable with that until probably 2019 is when I got really, really comfortable doing that stuff. So I've been focusing on that more and just trying to figure out other ways of creating content. I've got a project in the works right now with a couple guys that I've been hinting at for like 2 years, but I am not quite ready to entirely peel the band-aid off of it yet. But it is a pedal company, and the first effect we're coming out with is extremely in depth, and that's why it's taken so long to get it off the ground. But
That's great.
around that, I actually wrote a comic book for it, the launch of that, and I'm really looking forward to doing more of that because I loved doing that. I've always wanted
Ooh.
to do that.
Writing the storyline, or what did that look like?
Yeah. So I worked with a local artist, and I wrote the story, and he did all the artwork for it, and it just turned out exactly like
Wow,
what I wanted. He just nailed it. His name's Ethan Slayton, and he did it all like old school pen and ink.
that's really cool.
It looks so good. I was so happy with it. So I'm excited to get that out because what I really hope is that people will resonate with the story and the character. It's not super long, but and then I'm hoping that we can keep producing them even outside of the individual pedal launches we have planned. So
Hmm.
they're not really tied together. They are tied together. I'm trying not to be so mysterious, but
In a brand sense, they're tied
in a
together.
brand sense they're tied together, and in the type of effect and what is going on in the story, it kind of makes sense. But it's not like it's a story about a guitar player like
Yeah,
in
it's an
space.
allusion
Yeah.
to the
Yes.
effect. Yeah,
Yeah.
getting all literary and stuff over there.
Exactly. Well, and then like the company is called Cormac Industries. They're on Instagram, or we are on Instagram right now if people want to follow us. Not doing a ton of content there yet, but there's some stuff. And so the Cormac Industries logo like will show up in the background of things and things like that. So that, like it's there, but it's not like the guitar part of it is necessarily the focus. It's like more me getting to exercise my hyper nerdism, and I think there's enough crossover between music nerds and comic nerds that hopefully that can be another section of things that we produce, because I really want to write more comics, and I've been thinking lately about just straight up writing some short stories that are interwoven with the comics. So we'll see. That's something I always wanted to do as a child too, that I never thought I would get to do. So
There
hope
you go. Yeah, what a wild project.
yeah, it's a crazy one. I hate being. I'm so ready to just be like, this is what we're doing, but
Blah, here's everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's been holding back so long, but it's just the engineering has been much more intense than what we imagined, and I guess that's what we get for trying to shoot for the stars. So that's kind of where we are.
That's awesome. Well, I know you just got back from NAM. So what does the process of, this is what, your fourth, fifth, sixth one now?
I think it's my fifth. I think
Yeah.
I've forgotten
S-
now.
So what does it look like for you as this guy that partners with brands? You're building up your own brand, and then as a podcaster, what do you look for at NAM? What are you doing there? Maybe tell people what NAM is. I don't know if everybody totally knows. And then what was your takeaways from this year? You can keep it short because I know you're going to be doing this on tons of podcasts and
Okay.
stuff.
All right. So NAM is the National Association of Music Merchants. So it's basically everyone who builds any kind of musical instrument or musical instrument based product or something pertaining to music, uh, anything pertaining to music, basically. If they are a manufacturer of it, they're very likely going to be associated with NAM in some way, shape, or form. And then, so it's a trade show. So the manufacturers go with their products, and the buyers and musicians and stuff show up to see those things. It's huge. It takes over the entire Anaheim Convention Center. I've heard varying numbers of the amount of people that attend it, but I've never heard anyone say any less than 100,000. I've heard like 200,000. I don't know what the real number is, but it's at least 100,000 people that show up, and it's just this uh, huge trade show. And for my small section of the gear world, it's that's where a lot of pedal makers will debut stuff. It's just there's a lot of eyeballs and attention on NAMM, and it's just a massive event. So that's what it is. And what I do there is a little bit different than what I would expect. You would think that I would be running around trying to like hustle up business for myself, which I have done. I
Mhm.
did do at Summer NAMM. I tried to go introduce myself to some of the larger brands who might be interested in sponsoring the podcast and things like that. Um, but at Winter NAMM, traditionally what it is me running around trying to say hello to people that I talk to all year. That's really it for me. It's like just trying to get in some FaceTime with them, because it's like I talk to you for hours and hours and hours on the phone, and we never get to like fist bump, So
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It's for me, it's really about connecting those dots and getting to hang out with people that I really like hanging out with. But sometimes they live in Canada, sometimes they live in Florida, they live in all these different places, and there's just not quite enough scratch in the gear world for me to be flying all over the country all the time. The budget doesn't really
Yeah.
allow for that. So
So it's
NAMM is,
great that there's this homecoming. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's really what it is. And another wonderful thing is that a lot of listeners show up too. So a lot of listeners, I've always tried to do some sort of listener meetup. We've done a pizza party for like the last 3 or 4 years. We did a meetup at like this sort of food court thing this year, and it's great because it's like my people have come together to hang out and be nerds together, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun. So that's kind of what it is for me. It's really just about me getting to see everyone. That's really what NAMM is for me. So that people will ask me like, what was your favorite piece of gear that you saw at NAMM? And it's like, oh, I guess I did see some gear. That's not really what I was looking for, though. I was looking for faces. So, um, yeah, that's kind of what I do at NAMM. And takeaways. Oh, right, that was the other part of the question. That was what was interesting. Sometimes there are trends where it's like this year, 10 different companies came out with a reverb, or
Yeah.
and that really wasn't the case. Everyone kind of did their own thing. There wasn't like an easily identifiable trend this year, and I think that's interesting in the effects game, because sometimes it can be very trend based. um,
Hmm.
there's always some, like, what am I trying to say, there's always some interesting people at NAMM. In fact, there's a hashtag called hashtag people of NAMM, and if you search that on Instagram, you'll see some pretty interesting folks. But I have to say, I feel like, maybe it's because my head was down looking for individual people. It seems to be like a less of a thing.
Oh yeah.
I didn't see that
Not
many.
as people of Walmart this year.
Yeah, it was like more normal people. I don't know what that it's about. Maybe they figured out that it's not Comic-Con. Maybe that's the deal.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, that's NAMM in a nutshell. It's basically, yeah, just a big get together it's just a massive trade show, and it's a lot of fun. I think JHS summed it up with their meme the best. They had a soda cup that was in a soda fountain, and when you're doing a graveyard and you like push two buttons and mix together two different sodas,
Yeah.
except the cup was labeled NAMM and the two different sodas were love and hate, and he was pushing the two buttons. And I think that sums up my feelings on NAMM pretty well. I think it does for everyone else too.
Yeah. But I'd have to say, if anyone is questioning whether Blake is a true extrovert, he's still talking and doing a podcast the day after NAMM. So I would definitely say that the claims are true.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, it is.
so before we kind of wind into the last part here, I would love to hear, you hinted at it a little bit, asking for a friend, of course, but what are some common myths about getting into podcasting that you feel like someone would need to know as they build a brand, whether that's like your slice of podcasting, or it's an artist, or it's just another company?
Okay, so Yeah, so just kind of like some podcasting misconceptions. Is that what
Yeah.
you're asking about? Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so the first one is that you're gonna make money. Um, that's just not likely going to be the case. Uh, it's just not. You know, everyone looks at the Joe Rogans of the world and they're like, oh man, I'm totally gonna get that Casper sponsorship. No, you're probably not. You know that's
Joe Rogan was already really famous.
Yes, he was. He was already really famous, and he's been doing it for 10 years. Like
Yeah.
on top of all of the other stuff that he was famous for. You know, and it's not to say that you can't make money. It's not to say that it's impossible. It's just a lot more difficult than I think what a lot of people think. You know, I'm going to throw a couple statistics out there that I've been reading lately because I get this question a lot or something like it. So there's currently like 750,000 podcasts out there
Mhm.
right now. The good news is for people who are consistent, I think the number I read was there's only 190. I'm going to be off with some of these figures, but they're going to be in the ballpark. Only about 190,000 of them that publish consistently. So
Mm.
that's good, you know. So it's not
Yeah.
quite as muddy as everybody makes it think that it might seem at first. But then the other thing is only 7% of podcasts get 5,000 downloads or more per episode.
Mm.
That's a big one. You know, everyone thinks that like, yeah, you're gonna get 30,000 downloads. A very successful podcast, if you have 100 downloads per episode, you're doing better than most shows, like way better. And that's actually something I didn't realize until recently. Wampler and I were trying to figure out like where do we actually stand, and we're like because basically why we asked that question is at one point Chasing Tone charted at number 15 in music podcasts. That's the highest that we can remember,
Mhm.
or at least the highest that we noticed. And we were like, what? Like that? What? That doesn't make how like we were like,
Yeah.
how is that even possible? You know, like that was we were like, no, that can't be right. Like that's got to be a mistake. But you can look all this stuff up. It's public, you know, and yeah, Tone Mob's way down, way further down than that. But it's but it's still like it's crazy to me to see that it's consistently in the top 100. I'm like, my little show, like it's a little show. Like it may not look that way to some people. Outside looking in, it can vary, but it's not Joe Rogan. You know,
Mhm.
it's not even Song Exploder. You know, it's a small show, but yet it is by all measures a successful one. And I think framing that it can be difficult to understand that at first because I was just like, oh man, this thing is just a boat anchor. Sometimes it's fun to do, but it's not ever going to go anywhere. But then when I realized that, oh wow, we're already in the top 7%, like, but with Changing Tone and Tone Mob, it's like, oh wow, okay, I guess we're
Yeah.
doing okay. I guess we need to keep going because there's actually more potential here than we're giving it credit for. So like, don't get too wrapped up in the numbers is what I'm saying. It's like
There you go.
if you get one person downloading it every week, that you're doing way better than almost everyone. If you're getting 100, you're like doing way better than most shows, like substantially better. And it's just kind of a matter of perspective. When you see those, you can get kind of discouraged, but if you frame it like in this way, you just stood in front of 100 people and gave them your thoughts.
Yeah,
Where
it's pretty wild.
where else are you going to get to do that at? Like nowhere. Like not for your average Joe like myself and
Yeah.
you. That's just not going to happen.
And they signed up to give away their free time to do that.
Yes, and
Yeah.
they also you can see iTunes and all these places give you like your listener time, and it's like the retention versus something like YouTube is insane. Like people listen to like 81% on average of most of my episodes, and it's like there some of those are 2 hours long. Like
That's wild.
it's wild
Yeah.
to imagine. It's hard to imagine like sitting down with that many people and having a conversation for that long, and they're just giving you their attention. It's and I try to be respectful of that. I joke around and horse around a lot, but I do know that like people are giving me their time, and that your listeners are giving me their time right now, and I really appreciate that. That means actually a lot to me. So it's just trying to, I guess I'm not really stirring up any misconceptions. I'm just kind of giving some things I've discovered recently that like it's not this big thing like it seems, I guess. It's much more intimate and it's a much smaller industry than what it seems like as well. Even though it is growing like crazy. Um it's
There's still people I meet every day that don't know what a podcast is.
exactly.
And I think that's amazing too. So,
Yeah. So that's what I would say is like don't get too wrapped up in the numbers. And just keep doing your thing. Like just remember that each one of those downloads isn't just a download, it's a person. And they took the time to listen to you that day. So it's pretty powerful.
yeah. Well, before we wrap up and get into the fast kind of final questions, I just want you to walk through, since you're such a people person and you have such um, a connection with your audience. What are some of the, no particular order, what are some of the best memories of the past years of creating this podcast?
Oh man. That's interesting. So, well, the pizza parties have been great. I love, seeing everybody and hanging out. That's just tremendous. But as far as like standout things, I've gotten to interview some people that I never ever thought I was going to get to talk to. Some people that I considered like musical heroes, and I get to hang out with them, and then we're texting and nerding about gear afterwards. Like it's so crazy. So like I got to interview Brian Fallon, and
Mm.
that was twice actually. Once on his tour bus in Boston, and then once remotely, like we're doing now. And he's become like one of the pals. Like he was texting to me about Telecaster pickups the other day. It's like this is one of my favorite songwriters ever. so
Yeah.
so
It's
that's
like,
that's
I have anything to say that this person cares about? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then Frank Iero from My Chemical Romance, he came on the show, and that was awesome. And he's become again kind of like gear nerd buddy. And we when he comes through town, I'm like he's like, come on, bring a box of pedals, we got to check some stuff out. And it's like, what? Like I
That's
have a white
awesome.
Les Paul because of you. Like this is so insane. So those things are all really cool. One of the coolest ones, I mean, it was really nerve wracking to do, but it ended up being really awesome. The podcast I did with Yvette Young from Covet,
Mm.
we were recording on phones in the back of her van, and it was really like sketchy and weird because the power was out at the venue and all this crazy stuff happened. But that episode turned out really, really fun. Um, let's see. Oh, Joel from Chase Bliss is always like a super delight to have on the podcast. He's just such a treat of a person. I love having him on. Um, yeah, it's interesting stuff. So, okay, one thing I do want to get into. This isn't
Yeah.
some of these things. I've been talking about the fun side and the exciting side a lot, and that's all primarily what happens. But there's been also some moments that were really unexpected over the years, and where we would get into some very serious topics.
Mm.
And the first time that happened was actually when the first time Robert Keeley came on, and he just opened up about his drug addiction. And it was like, oh, I thought we were going to talk about like true bypass versus buffered bypass.
Compressor pedals. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And so he just started talking about his addiction. He had a very horrible addiction to pills for a long time, and it almost cost him his company. And he was very candid about it and opened up about that. And the same thing with the guitarist and singer Emily Wolf. She came
Mm.
on, and she started talking about how music quite literally saved her life. She was drinking really heavily and in a very, very dark place, and her love of music actually got her to quit and pulled her out of that. And she opened up about that, and we explored that a little bit. And so having those kind of conversations were really impactful too. And one of the things that um, it's actually a little bit hard for me to talk about because I get a little bit choked up, but um, longtime sponsors of the podcast Sinusoid, they had an employee named John Schold, and
Mm-hmm.
Andy from Sinusoid asked me if I would interview him because he's very much a gear nerd, and he wanted me to interview him because he was very sick, and he ended up passing shortly after we recorded, and that was a really hard episode to do. It wasn't hard in the physical sense of like trying to talk to somebody, but the circumstances kind of looming over it. But I also am like, that's something that his family gets to go back and check out. That his wife, got to go back and listen to him talk about something he excuse me, he is very passionate about. And to have been a part of something like that is kind of mind-blowing. And it's still there for anybody who wants to listen to it. He was a really, really cool guy, and really knew what he wanted to do, and he did it. So it was that's something that I never expected either. So yeah, not to end on a note like that, but yeah, it was wild, really wild.
I think it's awesome, and I think I'm only 10 recordings in, and hearing that inspiration, I've listened to all of those episodes of your show. So hearing that inspiration and kind of seeing that these amazing conversations, these amazing just little snapshots of humanity, I think, like what you're saying, it's what you're doing it for. And it's those intimate conversations that basically people get to come in and spend their time, whether they're commuting, mowing a lawn, or literally just sitting and actively listening to it. I think it's so special, and it's such an awesome platform for that. So I hope people get a lot out of talking about this. The last two questions are, how do you inspire others to make more music, and why do you inspire others to make more music? And then we'll get into the rapid fire after that.
Okay. Well, those are actually good questions. And I would say, before doing the podcast, I could say I don't inspire anyone to make music. What are you talking about? Like, I'm not an inspiration. But I have had people message me that have literally said, like, you got me back into playing guitar. Like, that, like, listening to me and how excited I am about all this stuff has literally gotten some people to start playing again. And I never would have imagined that. That's so insane to me. But just like, I guess I have enough enthusiasm that it rubs off on people. So they decide to pick the instrument up again. And I think that's like one of the best things that I could have possibly accomplished. I think that's definitely the way I inspire people to make more music. And what was the second part again? Sorry,
Second is why.
Oh, why? Wow. I mean, as much as music has been a part of my life and such a huge, impactful thing, like there's still times where I just put on a record and just like zone out, and if there's people who can be inspired to create something that impacts me the same way that some of my favorite artists impact me, then I think that's as good of a why as you can ask for.
Absolutely, man. Well, I love your podcast. I love how you've been an inspiration to me. I've loved that I got to talk with you a little bit about music therapy and what that's about. So before we kind of wrap it up, let's do some rapid fire, the quick six here. So I want you to pull up whatever it is, your phone,
Okay.
whatever you listen to music most recently with.
Okay.
And pull up whether it's Spotify, Apple, whatever. Okay. What's the last track you played?
This is funny. I love this. So the last track I played was Boogie Woman, which is a song by He Is Legend. It's a song that my son really likes, because it's like the chorus is, "I'll be your boogie woman if you'll be my boogeyman," and he thinks it's hilarious. So
that's awesome.
But it's like an aggressive metal song. Like,
that's really fun.
He's like, I'm like, how does that song go, Vincent? He's like, chun 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 chun. I'm like, yeah, it does go that way. So
got the chugs going. My daughter keeps picking up my guitars and banjo and sitting down at the steel. And every time she sits down now, her new song she's playing is I Like to Move It, Move It.
Yeah.
That's what she's playing whenever she gets on the guitar. I'm
That's
like,
awesome.
Okay, whatever.
Hey, whatever works, right?
You can be as specific or as philosophical as you would like to be. But if you were an instrument, what would you be?
Ooh, boy. Man, that's a good question. I never thought of it that way. I'd probably be a baritone 6-string. That
Why
seems
so?
because that's what I've been playing a lot lately, and that's the first thing that came to my head. Uh,
That's a great reason.
but I think that fits me. You know, like I can be melodic and I can be sweet, but I also uh I do have an aggressive side that doesn't really come out on the podcast very much, and I have to explore that once in a while in my own ways, usually by picking up heavy things. But like I definitely have an aggressive side that has to get crushed into submission once in a while, and so I think that baritone can do both of those things. So that'd be
awesome.
me. Yeah.
Cool. What's something that's been inspiring you recently?
This is probably going to be a little bit surprising to people, but I have been listening to two things consistently that if me 3 years ago would have said I probably wouldn't be that into. The first being Billie Eilish.
Hmm.
I'm shocking. I'm shocked at how much I have enjoyed her full length record. If you were to explain it to me, just like it's kind of like this, I would have been like, nah. But like there was just so much buzz going on, and so I was like, I gotta check it out. And I was listening to it, and I was like, I'm actually really into this. This is not normally my normal thing at all, but I really like it. So I've been listening to that a lot. And then over this last year, and I know I've already talked about her a lot, and I talk about her all the time, but Yvette Young from Covet, the
Awesome.
last Covet record is like, oh, I mean, I'll never be able to play like that, but it's inspired me to like really try different things than what I was used to. So yeah. In fact, there's a video I made with some stop motion stuff, and while the music on it doesn't sound anything like Covet at all, I was definitely inspired to make it by them because I tuned my guitar all weird and tried all this crazy stuff. But so that's a pretty direct one. Yeah.
That's cool.
I'll
We'll
stand
have
by
to
those
link it.
answers.
We'll have to link to that after.
Sure.
Her Billie Eilish's carpool karaoke is one of the best ones, I think. You get to go into her. Have you seen that yet?
No,
Her
I
with
haven't.
James Corden. Oh, you need to watch that. They like go into her home that she still lives like with her mom, and it's just really cool. If you've been listening to that, you definitely need to watch the carpool karaoke.
I will.
All right, two more. Or no, we've got more than that. What's a pro tip or a hack that you've been practicing that you think people should know? Could be like literally about any aspect of life.
Oh, okay. So I don't practice this anymore because I don't have a car with a heated seat anymore, but I used to. And I found that so many people that have cars with heated seats don't think about doing this. So you go get takeout. You on your way there, you crank your pass. If this is assuming no one's in the car with you, you crank the passenger's heated seat up as high as it'll go, and you bring a coat with you, and you go get your takeout, and you bring it. You put it on the seat. You leave the heat on. You know, sometimes they turn off once you turn the car off, so you got to turn it back on. You put the coat over your meal, wrap it up really nice. You get home, it's gonna be like it was fresh out of the restaurant. And
Genius.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And even if someone is in the passenger, you just say, I mean, you got to move. Like, this is how this goes.
Yeah, you have to get in the back. You know, it's part of the deal. So yeah, that's a big one that everyone's like, everyone I tell that to is like, why have I never thought of that? I'm like, you know, I never heard anyone. I just thought of it one day. I'm like, I'm not that smart, but I'm proud to say that I didn't invent that. I'm sure there's a bunch of people that do that, but I don't run into them very often.
There's that genius marketing mind, solving problems right there. That's it. Okay, two more. What's your go-to junk food?
Well,
not to be too derivative of your pizza question.
This might be surprising to people. I do love pizza. I'm a huge fan of pizza. I talk about it all the time, but it's not my go-to junk food. My go-to junk food would definitely be a greasy cheeseburger. For sure. Now, if you want to go even junkier than that, because at least there is some nutritional value in a cheeseburger. If you want to go something that just
let's go total nasty,
total like potato chips. Like I love kettle chips. I love Tim's Cascade chips. I love chips. Therefore, I try
all varieties.
Yeah, try not to buy them very often because I will just demolish a whole bag, and they don't.
I feel you.
They don't do anything but kill you, unfortunately.
Yeah. Cape Cods don't stand a chance
No.
in my house.
Kill them.
Let's see. Lastly, what person, project, or organization would you want to lift up with a shout out?
Ooh. Okay, this is a good one because it's another podcast and it's a really small one, but I love it so much. Some people in the gear world might know a guy named Mark Johnson. He does a lot of pedal demos and stuff, and is part of the Ambient Notes thing, and he does his own stuff. But yeah, he's a super cool dude. But he has a podcast with a guy named Kevin, and it is called Footnotes. It's called Footnotes, a history podcast. If you go into iTunes, make sure you get that one. It's called Footnotes ... a history podcast, and it's all about people from history who were footnotes or events throughout history who are normally just like, when you read the big textbook, just like, oh yeah, and then this person did this, and then it moves on. It's like, but wait, what did that person do? And it explores.
That sounds awesome.
It explores it fully. They don't publish weekly. They publish, I think, twice a month, or maybe even just once a month. But every time that comes up, I'm like, oh, I'm so excited to listen to it, because they do a great job of teaching me about things I would never even know that I needed to learn about. So I've learned a ton from it, and they do it in a really entertaining, like, conversational way. It's more like Kevin is the history guy. Like, I don't think he's a historian by trade, but he's a history buff, and he is like telling the story of whatever it is they're talking about. And Mark kind of is like listening and, like, you know, throwing in wisecracks once in a while. It's one of my favorite shows, and it's not very big, so go subscribe.
That's awesome, man. Well, like I said, it's been awesome to have you on here. You have been an awesome resource and encouragement for me to get things off the ground and started. So where can I send people to follow all the things you're doing?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this right now, you're in some sort of podcast app. So please subscribe to the Tone Mob podcast if you like to hear about nerdery and other stuff. Actually, I have a surprising amount of people that have messaged me that say they don't even play guitar, and they just like to listen, which is
there you go,
crazy to me. But so it may be your thing. So that would be great. I'm also at the Tone Mob on Instagram, which is the social channel I'm most active and enjoy the most. I'm on TikTok too, making some of that silly kid stuff once in a while, but I'm not dancing. You won't find me dancing outside of a mosh pit, so don't expect that. Where else? And then the Tone Mob Facebook group. If you're a person who likes to nerd out on gear, and I'm in there every day too, talking about pizza and gear and whatever else comes up. So that's probably it for me. And then if you want to see what's going on with the pedal company, Cormac Industries is on Instagram, so you can go there.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Blake. Thanks for all your time. We're going to sign off. And to everybody, just remember, give more grace, share more love, and make more music. All right. Thanks for sticking around until the end. I hope you enjoyed Blake's conversation. It was great to catch up with him and hear his side of the story. Please check out the Tone Mob podcast and follow him on all the social media outlets. And likewise, it would be great as a new podcast if you would consider subscribing and following us on our Instagram. It's at make.more.music, and giving us a rating and review if you have the time. We're building up what'll come to Patreon following and potentially ads in the future from some companies that I think you all as listeners would enjoy. But for now, give us a call on our Google Voice number and ask us a question. That's 502-509-5420. Or reach out with guest suggestions. You can send me an email at makemoremusicpodcast@gmail.com. And remember, give more grace, share more love, make more music. We'll see you next time.